So we had the first 3 lectures about the purpose, the wave that we're riding, the beachhead, and the 3 last lectures are more technical. So the first one was SWOT. How do you look at the competition? And remember, many times competition is not other companies, it may be habits or what is being done today, and it's definitely not small startups that have no market share. Small startups like you, even more advanced, who have no market share, are not competition. They don't exist. So never look at them. And today we'll talk about Agile. There is no Hebrew word for Agile, but I think an Agile is like an antelope. It's very light, it can run very fast, and it's very flexible. It can change its direction, almost on the spot. And I'll talk. And this is really a philosophy and a set of methods on how to develop products, new products, or new services, whether they're commercial or social. It does not matter. Agile has appeared in the last 10 years as a replacement for what's called the waterfall method. For those of you who have been in big corporations, you've seen the waterfall method. So you have a very structured way of starting, and I'll go through the steps. And actually, if you think of the university administration processes, they're very waterfall, right? You do one thing, when it's complete there's another thing, when it's complete there's another thing, and hopefully you get to the end, whether you're making a lab or hiring a researcher or anything else. So the typical waterfall process in big corporations, a big corporation has customers and you know what the product requirements are. It's easy to get the product requirements. So you start with the requirements. This is typically in corporations, it's called, you produce a document called MRD, Marketing Requirements Document. Based on that, you start the design. Usually you start with a specification, or otherwise called a spec, and people get together and they do a Gantt chart. Anybody here uses Gantt charts? Gantt chart is a complex chart, says I have this block of activity and that will lead to this block of activity and it will lead to this block of activity. And soon enough, you're in very small resolution. It's where it looks like any project is mobilizing an entire army to fight a war. It's very, very complicated. And then you start implementing, and then you have to verify the product. You have to do quality assurance, quality testing, quality control, and so on. And then, happily, you sell it to customers, of course, and then you have to maintain the product. That's a very typical product development method, whether you're creating software or whether you're creating an Iron Dome or any such product. The Agile method is quite different. Instead of thinking all the way to the end on how you create big infrastructure and architecture, and you're looking at all the details, and you're making many, many, many assumptions, which maybe in a big company with customers you can make all these assumptions. You actually start with the minimum requirements that you can imagine for a lightweight product. You create a plan. It will take a very, very short time to create a plan because you're not going to be doing a lot. You'll design the product, and in many cases, what we didn't cover here and I intended to have was a workshop of design thinking, which is a way of starting from the customer. It's kind of learning how to be empathic to a customer in designing a product. Maybe we'll do it in next year. Then you do the development, and there are iterations there, and then you release some product to the market. It's not the final product. You release some version to the market, to your customers, so you can get feedback. And then you track that. So that's the method of Agile, which is very, very different because this will repeat in many cycles until you actually have a product that satisfies a customer. So you do it in small chunks, and you have the ability to tweak and change as you go through. There are management methods of Agile, which you can read about on the internet if you do some research. There's something called a sprint. This is a sprint. You do sprints and you try to release very, very often. You try to have many, many, many sprints. Instead of having a product manager that looks at all the Gantt charts and everything, you have something called Scrum, a Scrum manager. And basically you start every week with a 15-minute meeting where everybody is standing, nobody is sitting down. You don't do it around the table. Because people, it's hard to stand for more than 15 minutes, so you really talk about only the important things. You don't waste time. So a few differences between the Agile and Waterfall. Agile is sequential, right? So there is no way to make iterations. You'll do the whole big product, and then you release it, and then if there are problems, you have to repeat the whole thing again. And for that reason, if you look at the software industry, 10, 15 years ago, when I was still with big companies, we would do a release, a product release every 2 years. Every 2 years. And usually we did it next to a very big industry conference, and it was a big event. And the whole company was mobilized just for that for about 2 months. And millions or tens of millions of dollars went into this process. Agile is a continuous cycles. In fact, I'll just go back to this. When you look at the software industry or even some hardware, electronics especially, we would do an alpha test. Alpha test means we're our own users of this product and we try to debug it, find out what's wrong. Then we do a beta test, meaning we have customers who are going to give us feedback. They agree to be early testers of the product so we can get feedback from them. And there is a special manager for the beta process and so on. And only then we do what's called the GA, general availability. We release the product. In continuous cycles, you're kind of in beta testing all the time. And I don't know if any of you remember or have noticed, Gmail, I think, was in beta for 5 years. You always had the little red box there at the top, it says beta. Tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people were using it. It said beta. And of course, it's always changing, and with all these services that are on the web, they're always changing. You don't even know that they're changing. They're always changing in little pieces. And that's how Amazon works, and that's how Google works. It's all very, very frequent cycles. They don't do huge, big projects. The waterfall project or approach is best or is done with a lot of upfront planning. You have huge, long meetings of everybody that's involved. It takes a very, very long time, and you do a lot of documentation. Why do you do a lot of documentation? Because there's somebody called a project manager. Project manager's job is to manage the project, and he needs to produce a huge amount of documentation. A lot of it is for what we call in Hebrew kastach. Okay, so there's like volume and volumes. You could have like really thick files of documentation, and that means that everything has to be with very, very low risk, right? There cannot be any uncertainty. You don't have any ways of dealing with uncertainty in the case of waterfall. In the agile approach, you don't want lots of people. You want very, very small teams of very high-functioning people. So it's not about, doing a lot of planning. It's not about reaching consensus. It's about, okay, here are 3 of us. This is what we're doing for next week. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Each one makes a commitment. We do the Scrum meeting, and we just go off and deliver. And the people who deliver are not little screws, in a big machine. They are the machine. They do it. Okay, so you don't want to have lots of levels of hierarchy. And again, if you look at companies, I was going to say like Google. They're not companies like Google. There is Google, but if you look at companies like Google, maybe smaller ones in Silicon Valley, you have a very, very flat hierarchy. You could have one manager managing directly 100 people. Okay, so it's those people have to be producers. One person cannot manage the details of 100 people. And the key thing here is to have tightly collaborating teams. So you can't have a middle manager who is managing somebody who is a team leader who is managing other people, and you have to go up the ranks to organize a meeting. Small teams that can just interact directly and without any mediation to solve problems. Typically in the waterfall model, what's happening there, a big part of the activity is contract negotiations, both inside and outside. So a lot of negotiations between teams, because these are very complex things. And if you're making a combat jet fighter, like a Lavi or F-35 or something that takes 10 years or 15 years, and you have many, many, many teams, you have the people who are designing the engine, and the people who are doing the avionics, and so on, you have a lot of negotiations between the team members, and the team could be huge. You also have a lot of negotiations with customers. So the approach with customers here is very transactional. You are in a transaction. They had requests, they had requirements to fix certain bugs or to bring in new features. You want them to pay for it. You want a commitment up front. So there is a lot of negotiation in this process. It's very bureaucratic. Here, you don't do any negotiations. Here, you just deploy whatever methodology you need to get this thing out. So it's a very big difference of approach. The best kinds of projects for waterfall, which is usually not what it is used for, are for very simple and unchanging projects. So if you know exactly what you're going to do, you have a hammer, and it has a wooden handle, and you want to replace it with plastic, that's great for waterfall. You can put the requirements in, you could do the plan, you could do the manufacturing, you could do the quality testing, and sell it to customers and provide maintenance and changing the plastic handle. On the other side, on the agile, it's not simple and serial. It's flexible and it's a continuously evolving product. So the big change where this methodology came from is, has anyone heard about lean as a methodology? Lean. So lean means don't create something big, intergalactic, very, very complex. Be very lean, be very rasé, okay? So you can move fast. So lean was a kind of a religion that came into being in Silicon Valley when things moved from the computer to the cloud or to software as a service model, when things are working on server farms but not on the computer. Because at that point, when things are working in the cloud, you don't have to have an IT manager who is deploying it inside your company. So it's a very, very big difference. You can make very frequent changes, whereas when you deliver software on a CD, or in older days on a tape, or you have to bring somebody in who will install the software on the company's computers and your customers' computers, that's a very complex thing. But we can just make a change online. You can make many, many changes very frequently, and you're reducing risk because you have features coming out rather than the whole project. After Lean was invented as a religion, there was another layer that came on top of Lean, which is a bunch of processes. How do you do Lean? And this is really agile. So it's still kind of almost a religion, especially among software developers. And from agile came, so it's a multi-layer religion. You've got Lean, then you've got agile, and then you've got something called MVP. Has anyone heard of MVP? No? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, MVP in football is the most valuable player, but MVP in the startup world is minimum viable product. Essentially, it's what comes out of every sprint. What is the minimum product that has some value to somebody that you can start getting some kind of feedback, and that hopefully somebody will use actually, and even more hopefully pay for that product. I actually don't like the fact that P uses the word or stands for a product. I think it's a minimum viable prop. Prop is like tafura. Prop is what you have on stage. right? You come, you see a play, maybe you see the Marriage of Figaro, it's an opera, and there is a barber shop, but actually, it's not a real barber shop, right? Maybe you have a chair, you have scissors or something. But if you ask people 2 or 3 weeks later, each one will invent in his mind some kind of a barber shop that fits what they know, barber shops. So MVP, from our point of view in this training, is what is the conversation piece that you will take out to customers to get feedback from them on validating or invalidating your value proposition. And the waterfall approach has many steps, many teams collaborating, which means you need a project manager. You need somebody to create a lot of paperwork and track the paperwork. And you make a Gantt chart, and of course you have to change the Gantt chart. That means you have to change who's working on what, and what leads to other things. And you end up spending more time on project management than actually developing. In Agile, you don't spend time on a project. You don't have a project manager. You have a Scrum manager. That's the guy or the lady who manages a 15-minute meeting at the beginning of every week, and that's it. Otherwise, you interact, collaborate in quick cycles amongst yourself and with customers. You want to have customer involvement every sprint of the product development. You don't want to go into a basement, work, and get out of there half a year later and surprise the world with a product. You want to have early design partners, early customers who are actually giving you feedback all the time. So what you really have is a marathon of sprints. So you have these cycles, you release something, you get feedback, you go to the next cycle, you release something, you go to the next cycle, and so on. That is Agile. And what that does is it reduces uncertainty, reduces risk, and gives you a lot of feedback from customers early on. So if you're wrong in what you're doing, at least maybe you'll discontinue after sprint 1, rather than discontinue after you spent millions of dollars. And there's so many examples. I can give you an example from my history. In 1985, I joined the engineering manager from Intel National, and we created an electronic design automation system. So these were the early days of engineering workstations like Sun Microsystems and others. And we said, you know, we can help circuit designers, integrated circuit chip designers to be more productive and get their products out faster with better algorithms and so on. So we worked in the waterfall method, and we had a system. We had to develop the user interface. We created our own GUI. We created our own database because there were no appropriate database management systems. We created our own simulation language. We created many different applications for synthesizing circuits. And we didn't have testers in the market, so we created the chip design group. And I brought them some projects to design chips from Silicon Valley so we could test on these things. And we had 80 people. And after 3 years, we released the product. And the product could barely design a circuit with 10 transistors. So we were we had lots of things, but you couldn't do anything with them. And we did not involve any customer during the process. And at that point I said, look, we're doing too many things. Let's pick just one out of more than 10 products. Let's make it very lean, a very small product. And I could not get agreement on that. So I quit. And about a year later, the company collapsed. I think we got $6 million from an investor. We got another $3 million or so from Madame Rashid, chief scientist. And what we were really able to do is to train 80 people very, very well. They were all very smart. Now they had some experience and they went into the market, and many great companies came out of 80 people. But you know, that was like a free university because whoever put the money in never got a profit. The benefit was there many years later. But it's a sad story because we could have been a significant company. So what are the benefits Why do you want to work in an agile method? So if you compare the traditional development, and by the way, the traditional development of waterfall is still what big companies use. So any new vehicle, any washing machine, anything you buy out there, any new piece of software, computer, applications and PCs, they're all developed in the waterfall method. What's really being done in the new methods, in agile methods, is mostly online products and meaning software services, and also new products that startups in Silicon Valley and maybe the East Coast are doing. They work very, very differently. So one thing is visibility. So if you start in the traditional method, you go to customers, you have the requirements, there is a lot of visibility, and then it all goes into a dark hole. Okay, it goes into a black hole, and it emerges when you have the complete product. In between, there's no visibility at all. You don't really know, nobody knows what you're doing. You're just sitting in some dungeon and working away. Second thing is adaptability, meaning the ability to make change. If you work in the waterfall method, you have a plan for next year. You have all these steps, you have the Gantt charts. Nobody can manage this thing, which means that you don't have any way to change or adapt quickly. So you start, in the beginning you have requirements, everything can change. But the moment you have a plan, you're done. There is no adaptability. The adaptability goes down very, very fast, and everything is being locked down. And then you emerge out of the black hole, and you have something that may be right or may be wrong. And when you work in the traditional method, you have business value only at the end of the waterfall, when you're all the way down at the waterfall. Finally, you have a product for general availability, you bring it to the market, and hopefully there is really business value. If you work in the agile method, every sprint you're increasing the business value of your product. So you're constantly increasing it. And lastly, risk. So when you work with the waterfall method, you have a huge amount of risk in the beginning. It only goes down towards the end when you actually release the product. And that's assuming that customers want it. In the agile method, you're reducing risk all from the beginning. Every sprint cycle, you reduce risk. Now, why is this appropriate to any startup? So this is appropriate to anything. This is appropriate or relevant to research projects. So you'd say, I'm doing the human genome. How long did that take? 10 years. 10 years. But maybe it should have started with something smaller. Similar thing is happening with brain today. Big, big projects that take many, many, many years. For startups, the reason it works best is really the first thing here, requirements. So for startups, you don't have anybody, you don't have customers, so you don't have requirements, you have some hypotheses. And even after you do validation in the market, you still have a very small set of customers who are giving you requirements. If you're a big company, if you are a Monsanto, or if you are an IBM, or if you are GE doing turbines or whatever, you have many, many customers. They can tell you what's the next thing they need, what kind of feature or benefits they need. But when you're starting with a startup, you have very few requirements. So if you have very few requirements, you really want to go into this kind of a model that generates requirements as you go, because you cannot anticipate all the requirements. So this is agile, and I'll say how it's relevant to what we're going to do in the next month. Of course, you're not developing a product yet. Right? The whole idea of customer validation is going out and invalidating your hypotheses, validating other hypotheses, and discovering new hypotheses that you didn't know about before, but you're discovering that because you're talking to customers. And your hypotheses are many. So it will be what problems customers have, what solutions you can provide to them. The combination of a problem and a solution, that's what's called a unique value proposition. What is unique about the value proposition you're giving to a customer? I solve problem one, everybody knows about problem one, but my solution A is very different from anybody else in the market. If it's not very different, I have a problem. It's hard to sell. What channels am I going to use to get to customers? How do I acquire customers? How do I retain them? How do I grow customers? What is my revenue source? Am I going to sell product, or take a subscription, or take no money and rely on advertising revenue? Or am I going to have a freemium, meaning I give something for free, but if you want more, you have to pay some kind of premium for that? Who are my partners? Because as a startup, or almost as any company, you cannot do anything on your own. You need partners, not just on sales channels, but partners that create the whole product. What are my activities? What are the resources I need? These are all hypotheses that you have. And you will go out to the market and discover which hypotheses are right and which are wrong and what you can change, and you will change very, very actively. Getting there, which is the process we're going to start doing next week with Daphna, is we're going to create a story, right? And this whole, you don't yet have the requirements. You have some kind of an idea or a fantasy or some big, big, big assumptions. So also the process for the next month or so, until we finish with Daphna and Edith, is got to be an agile process. Don't be locked in to something that cannot change. You're going to make many, many changes, even though you're not yet talking to customers. And then we're going to have more work on preparing to go to customers, and that's also an agile process. So the idea is be very agile. In Hebrew, I think agile is zamish, or zmishut. It's zrizut v'mishut. Okay? This is really the way to work. If you work otherwise, you will not succeed. And for us in the university, it's even more difficult because the administrative process of the university are exactly the opposite of agile, right? For many good reasons, they are that way, and maybe for some bad reasons. But that's the way life is. So if you're already used to these very slow and inflexible processes that you have in your labs or in the university, don't think that you're going to work the same way here, because you will fail. You have to be really, really very agile. So, what's your problem is still the key message, and I want to say a couple of other things. So, the weekly meetings are really, really important. I think with most of you, I've been having these meetings, not with you, Shra. We need to meet. And I want to talk a bit about this impact day that we're going to have. Why are we doing it? So in the next phase, which will start in April, you're going to be matched up by mutual attraction with mentors. Okay, so the mentors are people who don't know anything about what you're doing, they know nothing about your technology. And if they do, I will match them with somebody else, so they don't know what you're doing. They have hopefully never supported projects or products like yours, so they don't tell you, well, we tried it 10 years ago, it didn't work, forget it, do something else. Or that they don't tell you, wow, this is a great idea, I'm sure it will be successful, forget about customers, let's go raise money. So these two things I hope they will not say. What they do know about, because they are serial entrepreneurs and angel investors and VCs, venture capital investors, they know everything about the very difficult and very hard life cycle of entrepreneurs, startups. And that's where they can give you the most guidance. And by the way, most of them don't really know the customer development process. So that's, I have to train them in that. But that's one of the audiences that you will have in this Impact Day. So we'll probably have, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 potential mentors. The other crowd you will have is we'll advertise in many different forums that there is an amazing opportunity for entrepreneurs outside of Bar-Ilan to work with the most amazing researchers here who have the most amazing ideas, that have the biggest visions and purpose, that are riding the best waves, that have unbelievable beachheads, and are getting amazing support, and they're going to get a small investment to do customer validation, and they're going to get the IP from their labs almost for free. Who can resist something like that? So hopefully we'll have a lot of potential entrepreneurs who will want to team up with you. And what we will do then is we'll have a kind of speed dating, polygamous speed dating, where hopefully there will be 10 of them on each one of you, and we'll be able to choose. So that sounds like a lot of fun. Actually, it is a lot of fun. The process is really great. You'll stand up on stage. We'll have a couple of speakers. We'll have the president of the university, Ali Tzaban, talking before. We'll have some food. It will be a lot of fun. But whoever teams up with you brings a huge risk into the equation because you don't know them. Ask Zev. Zev says, well, you know, it's really, really risky because if I have a partner, somebody I know, and I know that he's always late for meetings, let's say, which is not terrible. So at least I know he's late for meetings. But if you get somebody coming in and courting you, dating you, and that person looks like really the most amazing and appropriate person and perfectly compliments you, and you look them up at LinkedIn and you have meetings with them and so on, because dating is happening very, very fast, and soon enough you get married. And then you find that that person doesn't want to take down the garbage, or they don't lift, they don't lift the toilet seat, or all kinds of more terrible problems. They actually think opposite compared to you. They don't work between 3 o'clock in the afternoon and 10 o'clock in the morning the next day. All kinds of things happen. So it's best to team up with somebody that you know, even if that person is not ideal. And by the way, if you find someone who is ideal, please tell me. Because I've not met the ideal person ever in any way. We all have problems. It's better to work with somebody you know, because you know what their problems are and you know how to compensate, rather than get married to somebody you don't know at all, and under fire, under a lot of stress you have to figure out, and then that increases the chances of breaking up. And we don't want the teams to break up. So in advance of the 14th of March, which is when we'll have the Impact Day, try to think of friends of yours, people that you know, acquaintances, people who are students together with you that you know, or people who worked with you in some company or some job, who might be interested, who might be really, really excited by what you're doing, and are not just willing, but really, really want to join you and spend a lot of time next semester working very, very hard and giving up the summer and helping you, or actually you are helping them to do the customer validation this summer. So I would suggest the next 2-3 weeks, try really, really hard to find at least one partner like that, because that will make the chances of success a lot better. So that's it for today. Questions? Chelsea?